So the first thing I'd like to say is that I think what we're talking about here is I wasn't here at the last proposal that everybody speaks to around making changes to unleveling. But from what I understand from that change, this is a very different proposal and a very different move than that move was a few years ago. We are talking about heterogeneously grouping grade 9 students in ELA class, but giving honors weight for all students. So what we're basically saying for students who are already entering at the honors level, this isn't really much of a change for them, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is. But I really want to clarify that, you know, this idea, this is not my proposal. I wish that Dr. Paul Bavluso could have been here with us tonight. Unfortunately, he could not, but he's really led the work with his teachers and with Bridget Haggerty, the department coordinator, around this idea. And they've been discussing and proposing and supporting this idea and trying to really thinking about readiness of the department and who's ready for this work. We didn't go out seeking this work and looking for it to happen in different places. This work kind of bubbled up from the teachers and thinking about how to best serve the students. So I think what this change would do is we're talking about an equitable experience for all students. We think it will help to balance class sizes. We believe it will increase opportunities for flexible grouping and provide more opportunities for differentiated instruction. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, which is one of the high leverage practices for the school this year, and we're really working on that. One of the reasons why we've made a shift is right now, there's really not a clear distinction around curriculum between a CP English 9 ELA class and the honors class. Based on the mass curricular frameworks, regardless of the level, the course curriculum is determined by the frameworks. And so when you're thinking about the curriculum in the honors and the college level courses, they are the same curriculum, they are the same standards, and we're holding kids to those standards. We feel like with the right supports that all students can meet and exceed those standards in the same class, and that would really provide a solid foundation for all students. Reading, writing, speaking, and listening are foundational components in all courses across the building, so we think that English is really a good place for this, and I'm going to call it a detract class, right? So it is at the honors level, but it is not tracked beyond that. So we think that 9th grade ELA, based on those foundational strategies and those foundational learning pieces, is really integral for all students. I think the other piece of it is that we're talking about, and teachers have been talking about this, sometimes your roster gets overwhelmed with students who need support. Your roster can also, in a course, get overwhelmed with high-performing students and who need constant differentiation and challenge at a different level. So we're thinking by de-leveling the classes again and creating these heterogeneous groupings, and we're really working and supporting differentiation, teachers will have a better mix in every single class. Without the leveling and different choices in the schedule, and AJ could speak to the numbers, we're able to offer the same course. We can open up the same number of sections but keep numbers down because we don't have to pick and choose where the honor slots go and the college slots go. So we actually lower class numbers without any additional burden on the budget. We're not talking about adding teachers or taking away teachers for this same number of teachers, but we can keep the class sizes more consistent, which is hugely important for differentiation, right? You want to keep your numbers lower for that. Just for some data, currently about 2/3 of our students are enrolled in honors English. So I know there was this conversation in a comment, and it was a good comment in terms of like, why are we thinking about this here in this district? So there's a couple pieces of that I've been thinking about. The range of our learners, even in this district, is pretty wide, and I'm going to talk about the achievement gap in a few minutes. But you know, one of the things that we're noticing is that if 2/3 of our students are coming up into the honors level, there's already a wide range of learners in those courses, right? We have a very wide range of learning there, and so we think that sort of going to this detract course will not stretch that range too much further. The other piece of that is that, yes, you know, we do mostly feed from one school, but knowing what we know about adolescent development and some, you know, pre-adolescent development, students in 8th grade are very different people than they are in 9th grade. And so really we want to think about not making choices in terms of placing students into courses based on behavioral or emotional readiness, but rather than on the standards. So this idea of having a 9th grade class where our teachers are laying these foundational strategies with students getting to know the students in front of them, making sure that all the students are raised to that level of expectation. And I'm talking all students, ELL students, SPED students, students who are coming from all different spectrums of the socioeconomic scale. We're really raising the bar for all of those students, and then the teachers at the 9th grade level are able to make the determination of where they go next with parents, as we do now in course selection. So that means that after 9th grade, that's not changing anyone's trajectory. If a student decides that they want to continue at the honors level, that's with the teacher recommendation around how they're performing in the class, just like it happens now, that would continue. If a student is struggling or feels like the pace is too quick, or that they just maybe need a little more digging in next year, our teachers, knowing those students and knowing who's going to teach them next year, we can go into the college level. So that won't change in terms of the course selection process there. I think it's important to mention that the approach matching the core values of the district, and I think that this is a really important piece. You know, we as a district value equity and access for all of our students. We value growth mindset. We value this idea that educating students is about moving every single one of them along in their progression of learning and growing through challenges, which again, these challenges can look very different for every student, and making gains as they encounter these challenges. So we know that raising the bar for students who traditionally maybe would have gone into a college level course might feel like a challenge for these students. But again, I think that we have teachers who are dedicated to this, who believe in this, and who want to support students to reach high levels of achievement. So someone had asked about expertise and sort of where our thinking is around research. Excuse me. I think, again, I want to talk to some of the work that Paul Bavuso has done around this. He's worked very closely with DESE. He's worked very closely with some of his counterparts in other in his network of high schools in Massachusetts. And we're finding that more and more schools are unleveling or heterogeneously grouping grade 9 students in different courses, some in English, some in math. And again, our choice is English because that's where the drive came from the teachers. So it came up from teachers there. But we're noticing that this is happening in other schools. Some of the other schools that Paul has talked about, Arlington, Concord, North Andover, Westford, and Weston. Cambridge is actually in the process of moving in this direction, and reached out to AJ a few weeks ago to get sort of our thinking in sort of how we're moving this and what we're doing and how we're approaching this. Again, I think that this idea of providing that equitable baseline, right, to support skill development and growth in all incoming students, and allowing high school teachers to help determine that trajectory is something that's really out there with other schools and the thinking, so it puts us in line with that. I do think NEASC was brought up, but that's been a big thing. So this move would put us in compliance with the NEASC standard that currently we are out of compliance with, and that's been a huge struggle for many schools. And I'm going to read you the line from NEASC. The school is equitable, inclusive, and fosters heterogeneity, where every student over the course of the high school experience is enrolled in a minimum of one heterogeneously grouped core course. So that would be, according to NEASC, English Language Arts, or social studies, or math, or science, or world languages. And right now, we don't have a course in those areas that is heterogeneously grouped or detract. So that would put us in compliance with that piece. The last piece that I want to talk about, and to me, this is the most important shift, and it's sort of a shift in metacognition, right? It's the how. And it's really shifting the level of discourse in grade 9 ELA classes. And I have to say that I believe this as an educator and as a parent. We need to further develop students' ability to engage in discourse in all classes. Students, we hope, will come to understand other perspectives, cultures, and backgrounds. They will appreciate that the 21st century classroom and workplace are settings in which people from often widely divergent cultures, experiences, and perspective must learn and work together. Students, we're going to support students, right? The idea is that we have to offer them support to seek understanding across these areas and work with one another. Even when their skills in reading, listening, communicating, speaking effectively, they may be diverse in terms of their what they bring to the classrooms, but we've got to help students to work together and to all learn from that experience, and we think that that process would be hugely important in this shift. So those are some of the big pieces that I really wanted to talk about tonight. One other thing that I wanted to add that I've been thinking about, you know, we heard the question the other night, is like, what is the research out there that supports this? What is the data out there that supports this? There's a bunch of data, research out there that supports this that I'll talk about in a minute. But I think we have some data in our school right now that shows us that tracking might not be working as best as we think it is. If you look at our most recent MCAS scores, we have some concerns at the school, and we are looking and digging deep around how are we growing learners at all levels. And the data will show us, both at the lower levels and the higher performing students, we're not growing students as much as I think we should be. We've had conversations with that in our instructional leadership team. We've been talking to teachers about that, and we are doing work on that. But it leaves us with that wonder, is if we are not growing students at those levels and we are currently in a tracked system, I wonder if a move like this, we're really raising the expectations and talking about growth for all students and really supporting teachers, and I'll talk about that in a minute too, to do that, if we could see, if we would see some improvement in our growth scores, and that's really our goal, because we'd like to see some improvement there. The last piece of data, again, there's a lot of data out there that would support this. Of course, you can find some research out there that will also tell you to go in the other direction, and that's how research works, right? And so we could probably all come up with some research that supports lots of different decisions that we make in schools. But I think there's a through line in some of these some of this research out there that I found, and it talks about the conditions for successful detracking. So it's not about the move of detracking, it's the conditions that exist if you're going to do that. And so a through line in a couple of these studies, Pedro Neguero, he's out at UCLA. He was actually one of my professors when I was in New York, and he's worked at NYU, and he's really brilliant around the idea of reaching the achievement gap, closing the achievement gap. And he really thinks that, and again, achievement gap is not just about race. And we have talked about the achievement gap and how it impacts a community like Wakefield, and we do have an achievement gap in our data. So the conditions that he talks about, and Carol Ann Tomlinson also talks about these conditions for detracking, resources, which we have, training. We've already been talking with Paul and Bridget around what is the training that teachers will need, how will we prepare them this summer, how we will continue to work with them and support them throughout the year. System-wide support. Again, we've had these conversations with Doug in the Central Office Administration, Kara, and we've been having this conversation in terms of, how does this play into the bigger picture in the Wakefield schools and what we're doing with students. So he makes that argument that if we can do all of those things, we can talk about raising expectations. And again, not just raising expectations, but closing the achievement gap, desegregating classrooms, he would argue, around race, gender, socioeconomic status, and our ELL and our SPED students. So for all of those reasons, we're really, we're confident. I think the teachers are excited, and I know that there's work to be done in terms of training and preparing, but I think in terms of the philosophical preparedness, the department is there. So.
Okay.
Questions?
The questions for the administration. Yes, Chris.
On the is it homogeneous? Anyway, but heterogeneous. Okay.
Depends which way you want to go.
Either way.
Either way,
What do we have now?
it would seem to me that you're going to have your high achievers and your struggling students in the same class like you do a lot of other classes, and having the smaller size is great. But the concerns, I guess, I hear from the letters that we've gotten were that they seem to be like on both ends of the spectrum, that the struggling student is going to hold back the advanced student, and or that the struggling student isn't going to be able to keep up, and therefore they're going to fall out. So at the same time, I realize that the teaching isn't what I had. So it seems as though things go into groups, and they're more group work than individual work these days anyway. So is that what forms that safety net?
Yeah, so again, we'll talk about differentiated instruction, and again, something that we've taken on this year at the high school, and we have a lot of work to do, and we're going to continue working on that. That's our high leverage practice this year. It's one of the high leverage practices in the district, and there's a lot of work to do there. But I think you kind of nailed it right there, Chris, when you talked about this idea that teaching in a differentiated classroom isn't a traditional classroom. It's not about the teacher conveying knowledge to students. It's about getting students to engage in learning opportunities based on standards-based, right? So how do they acquire standards? So when we're talking about, for example, writing, you already, even with high-performing students, have kids coming in at such different levels of preparedness in writing, even if they all come from the Galvin. That is the nature of learning to be a better writer. And so a teacher differentiates. I would argue, as an English teacher, that differentiation in an English classroom is probably, I don't want to say easier, because it's not easier, but it lends itself to an English classroom based on a strategy like writing, because you can have opportunities for different kinds of grouping where a high-performing student is partnering with another high-performing student because they have the same strategy around their writing that they're working on, the kind of feedback that you're giving students about their writing, the kinds of writing process strategies and activities that you're having students go through. So again, it's not me giving one example of this is what good writing looks like, but it's working with every student to grow their writing and grow a strategy such as, using evidence to support a claim or whatever the standard is that we're working on. So, I think that there already is a wide range of learners in our English classrooms, right? And I think that the level in which we're seeing our honor students being challenged in some areas could also be boosted a little bit in terms of differentiation, right? Because it entails that the teacher really gets to know the individual needs of the student. And so that anywhere on that learning spectrum, the teacher strategies are going to have to be different to match the needs of that learner. I don't know if that answers your question.
I was trying to give you an opportunity to work with that, but it just does seem that the limited amount of exposure I have, it doesn't seem as though the honors class is necessarily all that different than the CP class in the first place.
I don't think it is.
I just think that when I see that they all have the same novels they're reading, and they all have basically the same papers. Maybe the honors class has got to write a longer paper or provide more research or something, but there's very minimal differences from what I've seen. And as long as there's a safety net for the struggling student, and then that safety net is the school and not the other students.
Right.
I think we're, we're on
And
the
there's
right track.
challenges on the higher end too. I mean, I think
Right.
both conditions have to exist. We're not talking about teaching to the middle, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's sometimes what people, for some time period before we've really wrapped our mind around differentiation, that's what it can look like. And sometimes it looks like that even in a tracked classroom. So I think we're really pushing at that instructional strategy.
And I also think what's different that's hard to get our heads around is that the whole concept of individual growth. It doesn't. It's not where you are. It's how much you've grown in a year. That rather than looking at number grades or letter grades, it's well, I've gone from this level to this level individually, and that seems what DESE's going with all their testing of it. But individual growth is kind of the more important piece. And I think the adults don't really grasp that yet because they didn't experience it.
I think I could probably throw in another historical perspective when you asked about, the way things used to be. We've done this once already. Years ago, we used to have another layer below college prep that was called a language-based program. So you would take language-based English, college prep English, honors English. And the same conversation went on that we're having right now. And we eventually got rid of that language-based classroom level of courses to include those kids into our ELA program. And that's what we're doing right now. We're including those students in the English curriculum at the CP level. And we have paraprofessionals, we have co-teaching program, we have all of those things right now to support those kids. And so what we're doing now in 2019 is leveling up college prep. And there's a theory, there's a process, there's practice behind it, which is a little bit different than the phone call I got that Amy was talking about earlier, community somewhere in this area called and wanted to know what we were doing with this leveling program because they were getting rid of the CP designation on their classes. They felt it was a stigma in their community for their kids and their transcripts and all the rest of it. And my question was, well, what are you doing? Well, they're not doing anything. They're just taking the label off because somehow that makes a difference. They're not changing anything. We're doing something dramatically different. We're taking levels off. We're changing the practice. We're bringing everybody up. And I think Amy brought up a good point earlier about raising the bar, the thoughtfulness, the planning, everything that's gone into this energy, the risk-taking, the investment, the growth model, all of those pieces that we're looking at are the things that the adults are doing that we're asking the kids to do as well, and we're modeling it for them. So that's kind of what's happening here, I guess, in my estimation.
So, I just want to first start by saying thank you very much for sharing and for sharing the work of the teachers here. You know, one of the things that resonates with me that you shared earlier, Amy, was that the fact that if you are destined or a rising student that might be selecting an honors class, this is really no change for you. Right? The only difference is that you're going to see some other students in your class.
And your class sizes might be a little smaller, too.
And your class size might be smaller, which is
And the same kids that you're seeing in your classes now in 8th grade.
right. And so, but one of the things that, you know, I think is important to include is this notion that, you know, some of our most advanced learners really have a lot of anxiety around performance and getting the right grades and kind of spending the right amount of time and building a profile. And, you know, they are kind of a population that we've seen is kind of growingly at risk, right? Where they're having difficulty just managing the stress of this, right? And so when we talk about supporting all students and supporting students to have models in classrooms that they can grow and learn with and from, right? And I think that, and I think the research will bear this out as well, that having kind of that range and having other models in the class are especially around speaking and listening, right? Not only just reading and writing, but speaking and listening, the whole literacy model, which I'm glad you brought that up because that's what the ELA framework talks about. Right. We talk a lot about test taking and kind of writing and reading, but in regard to the speaking and listening piece and having kind of normative opportunities to learn from other models and classes, I think that this is going to be really great socially and emotionally for our most advanced learners. And I think that I can't thank you enough. I think that this is really progressive. I think it's innovative. I think it's like why you're here, right? And so thank you. I really appreciate it.
Ann?
Thank you. This was very helpful. So I think of this as not looking at students reaching some sort of objective up here, right?
Right.
It's where are you, and let's get you moving further up the ladder, right? Based on best practices, the best way to teach. So my experience in education is that reaching all students, regardless of their level, requires an enormous amount of responsibility. It's incredibly difficult, but it requires the best teaching practices. So what I'm hearing is that the English department is ready to take that challenge, and that essentially they're providing, at least for 9th grade, maybe more of an individualized experience because they have to reach every kid, regardless of where that particular student is. So I think, you know, back when I was in school, it was how many books did the honors class read, right? How quickly did they get through stuff? And the standards aren't about how quickly you get through anything, it's how deeply you get through it. So it's fewer things and different types of things that the kids read. So they read certainly literature, but they also have to be exposed to, you know, technical writing, and you don't have to get through that stuff really quickly in order to understand it well. You know, you don't have to be the smartest kid in the class in order to really understand it. You just have to learn and get the skills to be able to think deeply and to ask the questions and to understand. And I think also begin to work collaboratively, you know, in 9th grade, which, you know, I think a lot of the classes do a lot of group work, even in the math classes. But this, to me, seems like a great opportunity for the students to really learn with their peers, as they've been doing all through elementary school and into, you know, all through middle school. But in 9th grade, you know, the stakes are higher, I guess, because things show up on a transcript. But ultimately, you're learning these really important skills, and the grades will come. The grades will come, and it won't get watered down. The curriculum won't be. It sounds like it's going to probably even be better than what we are currently offering, because there'll be a more sort of deliberate focus on reaching every student.
And I think the focus is going to be on the instructional core, and perhaps not the sort of the teacher-student part of the instructional core, not the curricular part of the instructional core, because that is there. I mean, certainly tweaking and developing as we prepare for this, but I think you're right, and I think that support and professional development for teachers that will continue, again, as we start planning this, and then through the year, and then evaluating, right, how well it's working for students, and really being keenly aware of what you're talking about, that individualized piece and the growth, I think is important. Thank you.
Colleen?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to both of you again, and also Paul Bavuso and Bridget Haggerty for their presentation. I was fortunate enough to be able to see that in person. So this may be a silly comparison, but as you were talking, and as Chris and Ann were talking too, like I think of my dinner table, and when we're all fortunate, you know, the 6 of us to be there together, and what, like, the quality of those conversations are like, given the wide range of ages and intellects, really, of all my children. And I'll have to say, of course, it's a much better and vibrant conversation when all of us are there. And, you know, you may say, okay, you know, my oldest, yeah, he's the most book smart, or whatever, you know, we could use all these old-fashioned terms, right? But they all bring something different to the table. And really no one less intelligent than the other. It's just the way that their minds work, and they're different. And again, a sort of a silly comparison on a very low level, but I think of this class like that, and growth mindset is a communal effort. You know, it is something that we're striving towards, and we're all putting in that together. You know, whether you're an educator, whether you're a parent, whether you are a student in that classroom. So it excites me that we're moving towards that, because that is our instructional strategy, that is a mission of our schools, and that this is sort of one of those steps that we take. You spoke to a couple other things, again, about just the impact of differentiated learners in the same classroom and how they can support each other, and how maybe your traditional honors student who maybe has got A's and honors and AP all along, you know, but they don't have the same intellect that a student maybe who's been in CP classes all along has. Maybe they're better writers or readers or speakers, you know, and so what they can add to each other's learning experience. And you've already spoken to that, and I was going to ask you to speak to that a little bit more about how they can impact each other in this foundational classroom. And then really giving the students themselves the confidence to then say, okay, I am going to try honors, or I am going to try CP, because you know what, I'm looking at my trajectory and I'm really more into the sciences, so I'm going to focus more on that, and I'm going to do CP English, you know, and maybe your honors English person, you know, they're kind of flowing that way. So I think the students are going to feel more confident about their decision going forward, because they have like the tools they need to make that decision as a ninth grader and maybe not as a middle schooler. And middle school is really tough. Seventh, eighth graders are, you know, I talk to my eighth grader and it's like, wow, you know, and I'm like, oh, you know, yeah, we won't talk today, you know.
You're talking to him right now. Look in the camera.
Am I? Oh no, that's my fifth grader over there. Yeah, he's on there. But yeah, so the conversations can be tough,
Yeah.
you know, and so I feel like I do see the maturity change. You know, even in that 1 year, for them to feel confident and just, you know, they kind of walk a little taller because they've now experienced this environment. You know, so thank you. I am really excited for you to be able to present to our parents. Received a lot of emails, obviously, and we've heard a lot today and yesterday and since Thursday. And, you know, whether it's negative or positive, I think it means, like, we can take it as this is what our parents are thinking, and here's the information that we need to get out to them, because we truly want everyone to feel positive about this right at the end. So I appreciate your time and your time that you're going to put in the future as well. So thank you.
Yeah, RJ?
Thank you both for the presentation. So I definitely understand the reasoning behind this, you know, that we want to challenge our kids, you know, among other things. You mentioned plenty of good ideas behind it, and but I do kind of hear where the parents are coming from. You know, I'm just thinking back to, you know, when I was here at Wakefield High, and I think that it's coming into a new school, you know, ninth grade. It's a little overwhelming, you know, for many kids, you know, to do honors their first year, their freshman year. And, you know, I think certain kids sort of thrive in different subjects. For me, it was different classes, not English. And, you know, I would rather sort of strongly encourage eighth graders to do honors ninth grade English, or even the ninth grade English teachers to strongly encourage it going into 10th grade. I would even be okay with mandating, you know, one honors class, whether that's English or something different, not necessarily English. But I think that it's kind of twofold. You know, I do understand that the high achievers also want their own honors class as well. I can understand that. So I would definitely prefer that it not be mandated, for the ninth graders at least. And just a couple follow-up questions from it. So one would be, is there still an AP ninth grade English class? And number two is, have you thought of any alternatives because of the criticism at all? Or?
So
AP.
there is no AP
So-
at the ninth grade level.
Okay.
There hasn't been. So AP in English exists in 11th and 12th grade. There's AP Lit and AP Lang. So students who are more into sort of the writing craft and the structure of writing would take the AP Lang. And then AP Lit is really a study of literature, similar to a college level literature. So that's in 11th and 12th grade. Students can select those AP classes in 11th and 12th grade, even from the college level. So you can be in 10th grade college English and still go into AP junior year. So AP is the face of AP has really changed, and College Board themselves really recommend schools having more of an open approach in terms of kids who feel that they're ready for the course and want to take on that challenge of college, because we all believe that all of our students are ready to take on the challenge of college once they leave Wakefield, right? So we want to give them that experience. In terms of you use the word mandated. So ninth grade English is mandated. It already is. And I think what we're looking at this as, we are not, as I said to Ann a little bit earlier, we're not really changing the curriculum. Kids are already presented with this curriculum right now in CP. The leveling and the courses over the last 5 years with the adoption of the Common Core have really changed the face of what high school courses look like. They're the same standards, college level, honors level, ninth grade, they're the same exact standards, same curriculum. Certainly, there's a piece to it that we're talking about, this social emotional piece, sort of the environment of the classroom. And Colleen, I really like the parallel that you made, because I think that to me speaks to it. I mean, we are talking about diversifying these classrooms a little bit in terms of learning styles in a plethora of different diversity. But I think that in terms of what this offers, it's not saying to kids that the way that I think we're talking about an AP course in terms of forcing kids to take an AP course, which we would never do. I think it's more saying that this is the ninth grade course, this is the curriculum, and that we are going to put the supports in place to make sure all kids master those standards, not the course, the standards in that course, which they already need to master in the CP course. In terms of an alternative, we keep it the same. And that's the alternative, right? So
Hypothetically, could you do a CP and an AP instead of just all honors?
you don't offer AP at the 9th grade
Oh, you
level.
can't, okay.
It's a mandated College Board curriculum.
Okay.
I mean, that's what they prescribed to us to sign into, was 11th and 12th grade.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Amy?
I just have a couple of questions. The first thing I wanted to start off was on the packet that we received, there's some indicators of course levels that, break down what the difference is between a college prep and an honors class is. So, a teacher would assume that the student has, a good command of reading in a CP class and a strong command of reading in like an honors class. So I just feel like, across the board with, problem solving, kids in the CP may need some guidance, and then the expectations on the honors classes, there's minimal guidance. In regards to independent working, the same thing. There could be some guidance and no guidance. You need to be able to work independently. So I feel like the expectations in an honors class are high. And I feel like if kids are coming in from 8th grade to the 9th grade level with those high expectations and they're not prepared for it, I just think it might be difficult for them to transition into those classes with their peers. And, we're talking about 14-year-old children, and, they know in their class that they compare. All kids do it. So they might say, I'm in the class with this person, and they may not feel comfortable with that. So I think the children who belong in an honors class are looking to have a rigorous curriculum, and they want to be challenged. And I feel like kids who might not quite be there might be hesitant to participate in the class. So I'm just wondering, with those different types of dynamics with kids coming in, even though the class sizes will be smaller, what is the training that the teachers are actually going to receive in order for them to make sure that this transition is happening smoothly for these kids? That's my first question.
Okay, so I want to talk about the indicators of course levels, because we've talked about this a little bit, and we've talked about it, again, in our leadership team. I've talked to some departments about, I find these indicators of course levels, even though they're in our handbook and they're going to continue there for this year, they're somewhat subjective. I don't necessarily, as an educator, agree with how we've laid out what an honors student looks like, because I think, again, there is a wide range of learners among every class and every student, even some of our high-performing students, especially going back to what Doug was talking about, as we learn more about social emotional behavior and some of what students bring that's not right on the surface, but is right under. And so in terms of readiness to engage and collaborate, the ability to listen and problem solve together, I think those skills for a 9th grader are very undeveloped for most students, even at the honors level. And so I think that I understand what you're saying about that idea of students coming in, and maybe AJ in a minute you can talk about the peer piece a little bit, because I don't see that happening as much at the high school. We were talking about that in the school council last night a little bit about whether students are making assumptions about other students based on leveling, and I don't see that. I see more students at the high school making decisions around leveling in terms of strengths and challenges and what they really want to explore. So whether or not they're going to take AP, it's something that they love to do and want to explore. I think in terms of the second part of your question was about training. Again, we're in January, and so what we're starting to do, Paul has been, we actually have a conversation that's supposed to happen next week with Kara Morrow and Paul Bavuso in terms of laying out some training, whether that's going to be a guided book study. I know we've been talking and bantering around. Carolyn Tomlinson has a lot of research out there to help differentiation and looking at these models. Talk to Paul a little bit about taking some teachers in the spring to go look at schools that are doing this work and talk to their teachers in terms of what's working and what's not working. But definitely, that's another piece of the work. Also, some time this summer planning. I feel very fortunate to be in a district that supports teachers planning over the summer and really anticipating. And again, I think that planning will not be around some of the curricular planning that we've had in other departments in the summer, but more, as I said to Ann, the instructional planning to address, Amy, the things that you just pointed out in terms of how do you address a reticent learner. I would argue that that training is training that all of our teachers need at every course in the entire high school. But this is a starting point, and I think that these teachers are really going to be the leader in this in terms of differentiating that. In terms of other supports in the classroom, I just thought about it when you were saying it in terms of sort of having para support. You know, we're noticing working with Marcy Bercuzzi, who is our special education person at the high school, and she's fantastic and has been so helpful in really breaking down the understandings of where students need support. And we're finding that it's not traditionally folks feel like college level classes have more kids who need supports. That's not true. So we're envisioning that the 9th grade will have more evenly layered support across it next year with this change, because there are students who are going to need the help of another adult in the classroom, and we have that now in some of our honors sections now that's happening. So that additional layer of support and training will have to happen
So
there.
will the co-taught classroom setting still be put in place?
Yes.
Next year?
Yeah, well, right, so, I mean, that has changed too, and that's sort of more of a special education conversation about where the co-taught is happening. And I know there were some changes before I got here into this year that I don't recall, because it feels like that September was like, I don't know, 10 years ago. But there were some changes there, and so, yeah, that won't be impacted. If the co-taught was being planned, it will continue to be planned there in the English class.
Okay. Let me just grab my notes here. So when, what's that?
No, I was trying to figure out what she was talking about, but I
Science.
think it's science.
Yeah. that's
So
what I was
with
thinking.
the, so you have a teacher who now has this blended classroom, and when maybe the curriculum will include grammar and other things, and the children will all be tested, will they receive the same test? Will anything be like modified for a child who's in like who might be who might have normally taken the CP class but now is in this particular blended class? Are they grading on different scales? I mean, how is all of that going to happen?
The grading on different scales, no, but assessment is modified in classes across the building now anyway. Good assessment is already modified and is varied and has options, and you know, gone are the days of standard grammar tests. We're talking more authentic project-based learning where there's variations and outcomes that address standards. Right, so will there be standards that are addressed and shown proficiency by every single student? Yes. Will those standards be applied and measured similarly for every single student? Yes. Will the outcomes of what students are producing look different? Yes. So that may mean the kind of writing a student is doing, the depth of knowledge that a student shows in terms of how many sources they're using for a project, the multimodality that a student might use to present may go really in depth with one student and not another, but those standards can still be shown as proficient. So it's really a different way of thinking about assessment rather than a traditional test. And we're finding in the English department in general, you know, Pearson itself builds in project-based assessments at the end of every unit. They are no longer traditional tests. They are writing pieces. They have a writing model at the beginning of the unit. And so again, already we know that because of proficiencies of writers, I mean, even the adults in this room, we're all very proficient in our lives, but if we looked at our writing samples, they would write, they'd be very, very, I would assume. I mean, I'm sure you're all great writers, but I'll speak for myself. Me and AJ, we'll talk about each other, right? I mean, our levels of writing are very different, and so I think Pearson and the resources in Pearson really help that around already preparing teachers to use authentic alternative assessments that really help to measure standards, but in varied ways.
Okay.
I know that seems vague,
Yeah.
and I'm not trying to give you a vague answer.
Yes.
I'm kind of seeing it as an English teacher and trying to explain
Right,
it to you
right.
and thinking about Pearson, and maybe that's actually a really good point that we could show parents when we do the presentation around what a Pearson assessment looks like now,
Okay.
and how that's varied, because I think that's a really good question that you kind of have to see to
Right.
understand it. So I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you.
Okay, one more. So I know that also within this information that things are going to be monitored throughout the year. So who's doing the monitoring? You know, where is the data going to be? You know, will parents continue to be informed? And how do you plan to make sure that kids don't fall through the cracks if they're on the verge of doing that?
Yeah. I think many of those supports that are in place now will continue to be in place in terms of how we monitor to make sure kids are not falling through the cracks in terms of communication with teachers, guidance counselors, and parents, right? And I think, AJ, we talk a lot about in our weekly intervention meetings, how are we increasing communication around kids who are falling behind? And again, that's at all levels.
Yep.
So I think that piece will continue. But I do think Paul and I talked a little bit about how they would want to progress monitor this. And I'm not sure what that data looks like, right? Okay. But I definitely think that there would be some progress monitoring with parents and students in terms of how is this change, so first of all, for kids, it's not going to feel any different because it's the first time at the high school for them. So they wouldn't have known what college and honors felt like before. So I don't know if it will feel different for them. So those aren't really the questions, but the questions are around how the course is working for them. For parents, how is it helping to meet the needs of your students? Where are your students not being challenged enough? Or, as you said, where are you feeling like your child is not being supported, the needs? And so I think that, again, I think that's something that we need to do across the board a little bit more. But I think that this would give us an opportunity to at least figure out how we're going to have teachers. It could come from teachers. But I think that data would be held by Paul and Bridget. That would not be evaluative data. That would be data that would be used by the department to make improvements as the course continues. So it's sort of an iterative process, right, throughout the year, but then moving forward to kind of say, okay, how well did this work? I think at the end of the course, it would be really interesting to look at pass-fail data on this course versus we could look at pass-fail data now for our honors. You love when I do that, right? The pass-fail data. Sorry, what did I say? I don't know.
Nothing.
So that,
I think you're doing great. Keep going.
Okay. So, we could look at that as well. So,
Right.
But I think another place where, like, when you say who would monitor this,
Yeah.
the curriculum coordinator goes to all the PLCs. We have these professional learning communities. It goes back to another thing you were asking about, Chris, the makeup of the ASCs and why are they the way they are. We built in professional learning communities into teacher schedules. So if you and I and Ann and Amy were teaching English 9, we were in a professional learning community. We're meeting together once a 6-day cycle to look at student work and our progress in that class. And we're monitoring it amongst ourselves with the oversight of the curriculum coordinator and the input of all the other teachers that are teaching the class.
And
So
then
there's
implementing
that type
change.
of progress monitoring that goes on weekly based on how did this go in your class, how did your kids perform, what kind of feedback are you getting, looking at student work. So that PLC process that we spent so much time putting into the district has a monitoring piece of it that supports things like this and the curriculum coordinators that we brought into the district as well.
And then will you also, obviously, I'm assuming with the data, you'll obviously know next year at the end of the year how many children continue on to honors
yeah, we will.
10th grade as opposed to bumping down to CP. And then what would that do to the child as well, keeping that in mind and being mindful of that? You don't want the child to feel defeated because they were in this class and realized they couldn't do it. I know it happens all the time, but they don't have a choice coming in next year.
Right, and I think that's a guidance piece. Go ahead.
If we wanted to be here till spring, we could talk about the honors word that we're using because there's no honors word attached to this. It's English 9. Kids are taking English 9. So the next year when they elect their course, they're going to go to CP or they're going to go to honors. The only part that we've left on there as honors is the weight because we don't want people worried about the grade point averages. But really, everybody's having a common experience. And it's probably the last place or the one place in high school that all kids will have a common experience. So, we could homogenize ourselves to death around here, splintering kids. We're trying to have kids have a common experience in high school where they can get all the skills and stuff that Ian was talking about, and then they can go on their way. So they're not really dropping up or dropping back when they make their decisions in 10th grade. They're deciding at that point, where they want to spread their wings. I think one of the things that we got to think about is, where is this mindfulness? Where's our social emotional learning at? Where's our race to nowhere going? What are we pushing? And everybody wants to know, hey, where's all this happening? Because I'm not doing it, you're not doing it. What is doing it? So here's an opportunity for us to say in this one place, we want a common experience for our kids. And, these are the things that we want to accomplish. And then they can go off and they can separate themselves as they want. You'll hear from the seniors at some point, they'll say after they have the senior show, I wish we had an opportunity to all get together sometime sooner than at the end of it all. Why didn't we do this before? Well, here's an opportunity for kids to do things all together at this point. And I know I'm watering down the whole argument about English and the rest of it, But we ask 14-year-olds what they want to do when they grow up, because they have to decide whether they come here or do they go to the Voc to be a plumber for the rest of their life. When, are we just going to have a common experience, simplify things, kind of stay focused on the social, emotional kind of development and growth, academic growth? I think this is fantastic that we're sitting here having this discussion about teaching and learning. I applaud everybody who's brought this to our attention, who wants to talk about this. I think you've waited too long. I've been here for 33 years. Nobody's ever asked me a question about this book. I think it's fantastic. So, it's great.
Thank you.
I can keep going too. Your turn.
No, I'm good.
All right.
I've said enough.
Well, we're certainly glad we provided you the opportunity after 33 years.
Yes, appreciate
To
it.
speak your mind.
Yes, thank you. There's a lot in there.
Amen, brother. Amen.